I keep like it keeps dropping out halfway through your sentences.
Okay, so simple, quick rule is while we're streaming, and the stream is just starting right now, let's not talk anything about such things as can't hear. That was really hard to cut that out last week. All the stuff, and we want this to be a very usable stream for whoever wants to go through the course at a different time. Also, I would ask that you turn your YouTube down if you are watching the stream. That way, you don't interrupt the stream. And we are ready to go. So who all do we have on?
Well, you have me on because you've been talking to me for like the last 10 minutes.
Yep. I know we got Isaac.
I'm on. My dad's sitting next to me.
Hey, Tim.
I don't know if he's on.
What?
I've got Ray showing us being on, and Mike is someplace online. Are you guys on?
Yeah, I'm on. But it's pretty low quality. On the wrong text channel.
Okay, I see a Van Duzen typing, so that means that somebody's there. Okay, so installing Eclipse. Okay. So my agenda this week is going to be a couple of notes as far as some housekeeping stuff that I want to talk through. Talking about exercises, reviewing chapters 1 through 3, soliciting feedback, and then lastly going through assignments for the next 2 weeks since we're not going to be here next week. So the first housekeeping item is the use of the .py files. And I'm not saying don't share your .py files. I am saying an easier way and a better way to share your code, and I'll go ahead and do one as an example, is instead to type tilde, 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 enter. Oops. Yeah, it's not the tilde. It's the whatever that is under the tilde. And then that will open your
Grave?
Yeah, that will that will open up your box so that you can actually put in code. And then let me grab some code here.
Okay.
Whatever that is under. That will. And then when you get done with your code, hit enter, and then 3 more of them will empty your box, and then your code will print out exactly the way that you typed it in. And this will allow people to actually read your code and copy and paste your code from within Discord, which makes it an awful lot easier. So any questions on that? I mean, feel free to continue to post your .py files. Yes, I did change my profile picture. Okay. Did everybody hear Sam?
Yes,
Just
I
a
can hear
little bit.
you, sort of.
So he's saying the other thing about the code when you're typing code is that it's monospaced as opposed to adjusted for the width of your actual character within the font. So it's, what did somebody call this thing? Name of that character? Grave. Enter. Put in your code. Enter. Grave. Enter. Right? So you're putting 3, hitting enter, placing your code in, and then hitting 3 of those again, and hitting enter to get out of the mode.
Good for you, because I have absolutely no idea what you just said.
Okay, so if you look on the upper left-hand corner of your keyboard, underneath your escape key, you've got these 2 funny symbols. The one that looks like sort of a squiggle, maybe.
The tilde?
Yeah. Well, the symbol underneath that is the one we're talking about, the grave.
Oh, you mean the one I used to format my text like code?
Yeah. So if you give 3 of those, hit enter, that opens up your Discord chat box to then accept code, and then you hit 3 of those again and hit enter to exit out. Perfect, Estri. And that works just a little bit better than putting your Python script in a file and then uploading the Py file, because you never know what Windows is going to open it up with. And as I was trying to read those, for whatever reason, I'm still associating .py with Visual Studio, and that's not what I want to edit it with. And it just makes it a little bit easier. Right, you can take a look at it really easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's easier to suggest.
There's a tool that I've been playing around with all week, and I posted about it a little bit earlier, and it's called Jupyter. And it's a notebook system that has Python built into it. And what's really nice about this notebook system is I can go ahead and put formatted text in a field. I can have different notes that do different things. And I'm showing you Jupyter. You'll see it in a few seconds. And then what I can do is I can also have code blocks that will run. So if I go,
I have it online though. What website is it? Because I really want to get over there.
okay, you can go to I think it's Jupyter Project. Sam, can you check that out really quick? Jupyter Project. Jupyter. Spelled just like somebody would spell it if they didn't want you to know how to spell it.
Oh, okay. And
Okay.
I think it worked.
And the cool thing about Jupyter is that there's actually a mode that you can use online without actually installing it. And you actually get Jupyter by installing a suite of products called Anaconda, which is more for nerds like me who do analysis for a living. And that's maybe one of the reasons that I've been having so much fun with it, is it's got Python and R built into it. And it keeps track of what you've done. And that makes it really, really easy to, have a sort of a running trail of your code as well as your commentary. So I'm showing you this now in the chat. You'll see it in a few seconds. But if I were to go in and just go ahead and print a little Hello World program.
Oh, print Hello World.
Right.
Like you should have typed by now.
Right. So I can create a little program there. And I can just go ahead and run it. I might need to restart my kernel.
Oh.
And the thing about it is that because it keeps all of the code running. So if I were to do this, A equals
Flipping on me again.
hello world, and I go ahead and run that.
Oh, okay.
Right. Now, what's nice about this is that I can now go ahead and do like a markup and instead say simple demo program, right? And then create another box, and now I can run again, print, oops.
What I want to know is how to actually get to the Python thing.
Okay.
Like, where do I go from here?
Okay, we can cover that. We can cover that offline, Matt. So this is a cool little program that I've been working with, and one of the things I'd like to show you is when we get into doing like here's my chapter 3 challenge questions, where I can print out what it is in the book, and then I can go ahead and write my code and then show what happens when I run it. So this is a really, really nice way of keeping track of all of your examples, where you keep your code. And I'm not going to load this up. I'm not going to load code like this up until into my GitHub.
I figured it out.
Yeah, what I am going to do is want to keep track of what I did for this, because you'll find a lot of these examples will say, hey, go back to the thing that you did in exercise number 4. And if you don't have that code kept someplace, then you're going to have to redo number 4. Okay, any questions on that before we get into next thing? So this is called Jupyter, and if you look online or on the chat, I did actually post a link to where it's at, and there's going to be a button there that says, try it online. Otherwise, you install Anaconda, which is like a 450 megabyte download, so it's pretty aggressive. I wanted to talk a little bit about exercises. And did everybody do a couple of exercises this week?
Yes, I have.
Well, I know you did, Isaac.
Yeah.
What about everybody else? I know Rebecca did, that she was posting out there.
Did what?
A couple of the exercises.
Oh, okay. I only did one because I actually don't have a Python compiler until pretty much right now, because I finally ran the Hello World thing on Jupyter.
Okay. I also, if you'll notice, over in general, someplace up here, I posted it's called Code Sculptor, and there's a lot of these, but this is just an online system. So
Oh, found it.
right. And you can post your code in here. Now, the one thing I don't like about Code Sculptor, and this is also true about Jupyter, is it doesn't have like the autocorrect in there, and it doesn't have the documentation that pops up for you automatically like you'd get in one of the bigger IDEs. But if you are looking to go light and not install anything, Code Sculptor is a great place. There's a lot of these kind of places online, so you want to go ahead and give them a try. Okay, so here's the thing about exercises, and that's you're going to learn a lot more from doing exercises than anything else. The one thing that's really great about the format that we set up here, and using the chat system that we have that keeps track of everything that's going on, and the ability to interface with all the different folks. And out of the last 7 days, there have been people online doing stuff 7 days. So it hasn't been hard to run into other members of the class. And I can even see what's going on from work because I've got Discord on my phone. and I've actually answered a couple of questions from work on through the phone. But exercises are where you're going to learn the most. And I know Sam can probably tell you about this. Micah can probably tell you about this. There's a huge difference between reading a book or watching a video and getting theory when you're learning to understand a language and actually coding. You trip over yourself. You figure out all the things that you do wrong, and then you finally get it bit by bit. And I'm going to suggest to you that if you didn't make a mistake on the simple number one exercise from practicepython.org, you are better than me. Because even though I program as part of what I do for a living, as you're learning new languages, as you're dealing with different syntax, you're going to make little mistakes here and there. You're going to and just doing it makes the big difference. Doing it again and again. And I don't know if Sam, Micah, Tim, if you have any other comments on that. Whoa, not everybody at the same time here, guys. Sam is shrugging. So, the thing I'd like everybody to do is try to post your results from one exercise a week and read what everybody else is posting, and then try to comment on somebody else's. And it might be, hey, you could, consider doing this, or ask a question. One of the great questions that came up really early this week is, if you look at one of the examples, I think it was number 2, where you're pulling somebody's age, and then you're telling them in what year they're going to be 100. There's a little bit of a problem with that exercise, right? And that's that. If your birthday has passed, it'll be right. If your birthday hasn't passed, it won't. And so there was a really good discussion that was going on in the first couple of days about how to get past that. And I think between Casey and Isaac and Rebecca, they came up with a couple of different solutions to that. And that's really cool. And that's the way that we want we want things to do. Optimally, I'd like it if you guys could get up to doing one example every day. Now, keep in mind, I've linked to hundreds and hundreds of exercises. If you look on them, I mean, one of the pages has got a link to like a couple dozen pages of examples, and that allows you to stay at the level that you're at. If you're not ready to go on to that next exercise, there's several different beginner sites that we're linking to. It only takes a few minutes to do one, and I'm going to tell you once again, stress a small amount every day will teach you a lot better than trying to do a large amount periodically. So that's going to be my big thing, is just code every day, and don't code based upon just trying to learn something. I mean, that's the thing that's really nice about the exercises, is it gives you something to do. You're trying to actually accomplish something, and that works a lot better than just trying to code based upon, hey, the book said to do XYZ. You don't really learn that way. So that's me on my soapbox. Small amount every day. Try to post at least once a week. What you do, even if it's the same thing as everyone else, and then try to do a little bit every day. Okay, chapter review. I am not going to spend any time on chapter 1 unless somebody saw something in chapter 1 that they really want to discuss, other than vocabulary. BizBuzz is one of the programming tests that they use now. I'm trying to think of the one that GoDaddy uses, but it is pretty common these days for development jobs to include some sort of test that they give you, where they have you go online and do this thing that's timed, and so this is another reason that you want to do examples and exercises, is you want to get good at writing reasonably quickly. An operating system, I'm assuming everybody knows what any of these things are. Operating system is, the system that, operates all your programs on your computer. Graphical user interface, that's where you click on pictures instead of, type stuff in text. Windows, Unix, Linux. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time on Linux just simply because Linux has about a 3% market share on the desktop market, but it's actually the most common operating system on the planet today. And does anyone know why I'd say that?
Which one? Linux?
Yes.
Because it's a free operating system that runs on just about every computer,
Yeah, but
even old ones.
there's a certain operating system called Android that's built on Linux.
Yep. Ah,
Right.
And it's not just that. It's also basically almost every embedded environment is some version of Linux. So,
Absolutely.
So Green Hills also is a common real-time operating system.
And sooner or later, you're going to run into this L word, this Linux, and not a bad idea to get yourself an old computer and load up Linux, and just learn to get around in it and work in it. Yeah, you can use a virtual machine. You can also dual boot, but hey, Micah, is Chris still teaching exclusively on Linux?
it seems like it, because that's what we learned.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what he's doing this year, but past years we've it depends. Typically it's Linux in a virtual box.
Okay. It's just a great opportunity for you guys to learn and keep in mind that Linux today is 100 times more user friendly than it was even just a few years ago, and it's getting better and better. Open source, you're going to hear this term a lot. Open source is just simply software that is sort of maintained by the community. Nobody claims ownership to it, though usually with open source software, somebody is, sort of in charge of, keeping a central corral, and maybe they're the ones that originally wrote it or wrote the base program. There's a lot of people who don't think that we should charge for software. And they have, there's a lot of them around the world, and they share, and usually open source software changes very, very quickly because you'll have a huge user community that's all creating it. But at the same time, there's also going to a lot of times be limitations to open source software. So a lot of development is done on open source software. Linux is an open source software system, right? Python is open source. Apache server is open source, and that's used very extensively. So open source does not mean bad, does not mean second rate. It just means it's a different way of distributing software and developing ownership. A server, I think. Everyone probably knows what servers are these days. They're large computers that run in the background that do things from storing our files to processing big programs and that sort of thing. And I'm not even going to cover Unix like. So, any questions on any of that kind of vocabulary from chapter 1? I think that the biggest thing that I got out of chapter 1 is there's a lot of agreement that I have with the author on this idea that you just gotta practice and do this on a regular basis. So we go on to chapter 2, and I think we learned one thing in chapter 2, which was how to print. So we're not going to spend much more time doing that. I think everybody knows what programming is. Code is what we do in programming. And I'm going to make this point about programming and code. And I've made this before. I'm going to make it probably a few more times before we get done. And that's that nobody likes to code. People like to create things. And if you think about going into trying to learn how to be a programmer from the point of view of you want to technically write stuff and not think about you're writing this stuff to do something and focus on what you're trying to do, you're going to have an awful time of it. Because the goal of any programming endeavor is to create something that does something, right? So get passionate about what you want to do, whether it's making a game, whether it's making a business application, whether it's making a little app that counts how many steps that you take as you're walking, keeps track of how much you've spent on groceries or whatever. You know, the focus should always be not on the action of coding or the action of programming, but what it is that you're trying to do, what is it you're trying to create, what is it you're trying to accomplish, and that's where it gets really fun.
Charles, you're cutting out again.
I will try to be better. Low-level programming language and high-level programming language. I'm going to address this by just talking about a high-level programming language and talking about Python. Python is very easy to read. It's written in English. There's not. I don't think that there's too many commands in it or keywords that aren't pretty clear in English. It's concise. And you compare that to some of the programming languages that are closer to machine code, and it's one of those things that you understand the difference between low-level programming languages that are very hard to read, very hard to write, high-level programming languages that are very easy to read, very easy to write. Why would anyone want to touch a low-level programming language?
So you can do basically whatever you need.
Because you usually start on the basic level and then go to the more advanced later. Because it's kind of like it's rungs on a ladder.
Tim, you have anything to throw in on this one? Why would anyone want to touch a low-level programming language?
A low-level programming language is actually the language, or very close to the language of the machine, and it gives you the absolute most control over exactly what is happening. Versus depending on somebody else's interpretation.
Yep. I can go with that. It's like driving a stick shift versus an automatic car. I get it. I get control. You probably will. If anyone's ever used a Macintosh and then they turn around and use Linux, you get this understanding that a Macintosh is a lot easier to use, but that ease of use comes at the cost of options and control. And it's the same thing here. Though Python, you can do an awful lot of stuff that you'd want to do now. It's not like you're gonna use Python though to do something where you want to control the hardware very, very directly. And then lastly, Python is easy to read, open source language, right? It's obviously a high level programming language, but there's a lot of things that are really odd about it. Python is what they call duck type, but it's also more strongly typed. And we'll get into that, sometime later. But there's little things about it that are very interesting. If you have programmed for a while or spent time working with other languages. And one of the reasons for that is it's very new. And, it was written by this guy, Guido van Rossum, who wrote them, wrote it very recently. I think the first release of Python was in the 90s. And he knew all the things that we had learned up until his time. I think he did a great job of putting together a great language for doing a lot of things with. So Chapter 2 challenges. Simply print something other than Hello World. So I printed Atlanta will win the Super Bowl eventually. Still heartbroken. So chapter 3, we covered a few things, and this was the first chapter. I thought that we sort of got our feet wet with programming. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull it up, and we can quickly walk through. The first thing that we talked about in chapter 3 was comments, and everyone knows how to put a comment in. I'm hoping, which is just simply putting a hash sign or a pound sign, as we used to call it. Why would we want to put a comment in?
To give people who aren't reading your or who don't know what your code is to be able to understand that code.
Who is your most important audience with comments?
Other coders.
Okay, all of you guys are now cutting out.
I might suggest it's not all of us. It might be that you're having some issues.
Yeah.
Um,
It could be your internet.
You guys didn't hear anyone getting cut out?
no.
I'm getting perfectly fine internet.
Okay, so does anyone have any disagreement with that your primary your primary audience for comments are going to be other coders? Going to be other coders. There's nothing wrong with that answer. I think that there's another perspective though. Whoever's maintaining the code at the time. Yep.
Or if it's
Go ahead.
if it's a open source thing and people are trying to learn code, having a bunch of comments could possibly help them to learn.
I
it
am going to
is
tell you
doing.
that my number one audience when I'm commenting my code is future me. And this is something that you'll learn is that you have code that you create, test, put into production. 3 years later, you've got to make some changes to it. And you'll look at it and you say, what exactly was I thinking? Right? It was me. So here's the thing about commentary within your code. There's a lot of different beliefs on it. I think that one of the strongest beliefs out there that I think is really correct is when you write your code well, it doesn't take a lot of commentary. And earlier this week, because we were dealing with comments, I did something, which is I posted 2 versions of the same code. And let me go there really quick. I think I did that in general, maybe?
Mm.
Here we go. 2 versions of the same code. You'll see this all in a second. And I asked the question, which of these code blocks are better and why? And
they were both the same. They did exactly the same
they
thing.
did exactly the same, and 2 different programmers would give you 2 different answers here. I personally prefer the first. Some of the guys I work with would prefer the second. I think that the rule of thumb is simply the more clever your code, the more clever you have to be to read it. And I would definitely put more commentary in the second code using that type of style than I would in the first. Oh, Rebecca, it's it would have showed on the stream.
Okay, I keep hearing people cutting out.
Okay, let's go back. Printing, I think we all know. The way that lines work and spaces work in Python are a little bit different in that White space matters in Python, and this is going to be covered a little bit later in the book, but I'm going to cover it a little bit right now because if you're doing the examples, this is sort of important. The first is that every statement has to start all the way over at the left margin. If it's a multi-line statement, it has to be indented, right? And spaces count here. So if you indent 3 spaces and then you indent a 4th space or only indent 2 for the next line after that, it won't work. It'll throw you an error. And one of the things that I think you should get to know are going to be, and I think this is covered later, so never mind. I'll just go on. We have these things called keywords, and keywords are just basically going to be those special words that are used within the language to do something, like print. Print's actually a function, but keywords are going to be like maybe length. If we take a look up, that's not. Import's a keyword. Keywords do things, and you can't use those keywords for like variables and that sort of thing. Data types we're going to get into quite a bit more on a later date, but simply put, a data type is the type of data you're working with. If you remember nothing else from this discussion, think about 4 main data types. Right? There's going to be string, there's going to be integers, there's going to be floating point numbers, and there's going to be booleans. So, what do you think a string is?
A string is just the text you put in between the 2 little those things that I just commented on in topic. I don't really know what to call them.
Yeah, those are quotation marks.
Oh, single quotes.
Yeah.
Single quotes.
A string would be a group of characters formatted into an array of characters.
Yeah, I'm gonna stray away from using the term array because that has some specific terms. But keep in mind everything in Python is an object. So a string is going to be an object, and that's an important distinction. A string is going to be an object that is just going to be a very, very specific and unchangeable.
Does it look like this?
Yeah. So it's going to be an object that's a very specific and unchangeable arrangement of characters that are going to include numbers, letters, and punctuation.
I've always seen it as changeable.
It's not changeable in Python, and we'll get into that in a later lesson. But just take my word on it. It's not changeable.
Okay.
Right? We'll learn a term called immutable sooner or later, but it's just not changeable. A number can be of 2 varieties. One is going to be an integer. And what's an integer? This you should remember from math class.
An integer is a non-decimal number that can go from negative infinity to positive infinity.
Yes. So the main thing here is it's a whole number.
Yes.
So the other type of number we talk about is called a floating point number. So what do you think that is?
I'll let someone else answer that if that would be fine with you.
Is basically just a decimal that isn't a whole number, like that has tenths or hundredths or thousands or something. Yes. I took a field trip to grab the charging cord because I'm about to die.
Okay.
Again.
So why do you think they call it a floating point?
Because the floating point can be anywhere you want it to be.
So you basically have a number, and then you have a point that you put into it, and based upon where you put that point, every time you move that point to the left, you divide by 10, and every time you move that point to the right, you divide by 10. And there's a lot more to it than that, but I'm just going to leave it like that, is that a float is going to be a number that has a decimal point someplace in it. Even if it's like 1.0, that's still going to be a float. So even if you have nothing on the right side of the decimal point, so long as you have that decimal point, it's going to be a float. And then the last type I want you guys to get familiar with is called a Boolean. And a Boolean, very simply, is true or false.
Values 0 or 1, true or false, A or B, me or you, something like that.
In Python, the two values are going to be capital T R U E without quotes, or
All caps or
No.
only the first letter caps?
First letter cap, and then
So
capital FALSE without quotes.
So like this and this?
Yes. And you're going to use that as a way of, it's part of a test that you'll do for things as well. You're going to look for the Boolean answer of true or false in any time that you're using a comparative operator. Okay. Did I say that right? No. Anytime that you're using a like an if statement. Okay.
While statements, or statements, basically anything that requires a comparison.
Okay. Constants and variables. Very simply put, a constant is a constant. It doesn't change. So what would be?
But it can be anything.
Right. In Python, what would be an example of a constant?
2.
Yes. What else would be a constant?
18 and a half?
It could be. Yeah, I mean, so you're looking at these things and saying these are things that don't change that you can type in, and the easy way to know whether or not it's a constant or a variable is you set a variable, a constant you don't set. And since everything in Python is an object and you point to those objects that exist already out there in space someplace, there's a little bit different connotation for constants in Python than in some other languages. A variable, simply put, is something that you basically create a label, and then that label you will point to a value.
So it can be anything and become anything.
So here's the thing I want you to think about in Python. If you think about variables as a label that is constrained to only pointing to a unique type of data. So if you have a variable that points to a string, and then you try to use that string or that variable to do math with, it probably won't work well. And I say label that points to something because I want you to get this understanding, because this is different between Python and some other languages. Variables in Python don't contain anything. They just point to values. So if I have the following code, on topic, oops. Okay. A equals B and C equals B. Does C equal A?
If A equals B and B equals C, then yeah.
Okay.
Because I think that's what you just said, but I didn't quite catch it.
I'm going to pull up Jupyter, and we're going to do a little thing here. Go. A equals B. B equals C. Sorry. C equals B. And let's just say b equals 2.
How about 7? I like 7.
Let's process this really quick. B is not defined.
So
B
B
equals
can be anything we want it to be?
2. Okay. So I'm going to say b equals 2, a equals b, c equals b. So if I were to say print a, what am I going to get?
Can be anything we want it to be?
I'm going to get 2. Now, if I print c equals c plus 1, print c, what do you think I'm going to get here, guys?
Whatever c plus 1 is.
So what is c when I'm going into this?
We don't know.
Well, c. Well, no. This is still the same session as here, right? So c equals b and b equals 2.
Okay, then it would be 3.
Right, because b is pointing to this value of 2. C is now pointing to the value of 2 because we set it to the same place that b was pointing to. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Right? Now, if I were to
What?
say print,
Sorry, I just dropped out for a few seconds because it disconnected.
okay, print a, we've got 2, because a is still pointing to the same thing that b is. Now, what happens if we do this? B equals b times 10. Print.
Previous value times 10?
What are we going to get here when we say print a?
Well, we haven't redefined A, so it'll just print the previous value of A.
But why? Because we said that a is equal to b, and we just changed what b is used to.
You defined A to B while B was still
Right.
2, is it?
Yeah, and so that's the thing is that b is pointing to 2. A is not pointing to b, it's actually pointing wherever it is that b is pointing. So in this, it's saying, hey, set a to be the same value as b. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So when I say these aren't containers, they're just pointing places.
Yep.
This is where it really makes a big difference, is that if b actually contained 2 and a was pointing to b as opposed to whatever value b was pointing to, then this would be 20 instead of 2. Okay. Here. Increment and decrement, that just means count up by 1 or count down by 1, or count up by some amount and count down by one amount or some amount. So, do you remember when we used to like count 100 by 5s?
Yes.
Right? To increment would be to count by something, right? So we can go, and if we take a look at here, there's a shorthand for it, and it means, whoops, x equals x. So let's just say we have a value of a variable of x, and we say x equals x plus 1. We're incrementing by 1, and there's a shorthand for it, which is x plus equals 1. If we have x equals x plus 5, the shorthand would be x plus equals 5. And that just means increment or go up by that number. And it's a shorthand. And then decrement means the opposite, go down by. Does that make sense? And we'll get into incrementing and decrementing because you do it a lot. I mean, that's one of those things. Syntax.
By the way, I'd said yes, it does make sense, but I forgot I had my mic muted because I was eating.
Okay. Syntax is just the rules and, sort of the rules of the road as far as the language goes. Same way as English has syntax, Python has syntax. Errors and exceptions we're going to spend an awful lot of time on later. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that right now. Just know that you can figure out what's going on with your code if it doesn't work by looking at the errors and exceptions usually. You can also manipulate errors and exceptions to anticipate things that can go wrong and work around them, or to, in certain cases, throw your own specialty errors based upon conditions that you want to test for. Operators, get to know these. I've got a chart in the general documentation section of the OneNote. There's a lot of operators. So more than just these mathematical or arithmetic operators, there's a lot of operators. And operators are just going to be the things that you use to explain what to do with two different values, whether it's to compare them, add them, multiply them, whatever. Comparison operators, same thing. And I think with logical operators, I think we're getting... Oh, conditional statements and... Is that the... We don't get into anything more than that. Okay. Conditional statements we want to spend a little bit of time on. What is conditional processing?
A conditional thing. What did you call it again?
Conditional processing.
Conditional processor basically does one bit of code if, say, b equals 3, and does a different bit of code if b equals 4, or
Right.
does a third bit of code if b doesn't equal anything.
Right. So let's just say that you're hungry and
Which I was.
Yeah, you think you have some bacon and you want to make a BLT, but you might not have some bacon. And if you're not going to make a BLT, then you're going to just make a hamburger. Right? You would have a conditional process step here that says, if we have bacon, make a BLT. Otherwise, make a hamburger. And the way that works is we have three main keywords for it. If, else, and elif.
Oh, what?
If, else, and elif. So I'll put a really small program together here really quickly. And
I've always heard it as just else if before, like in JavaScript, only use else if, but
right.
elif is new.
Yeah,
but it's probably the same thing.
Yeah, in Python, there's elif, and it's just it's shorthand for else if. Okay. I'm cleaning this up because I Use some capitals that I shouldn't have. Okay. Okay, so here is your basic statement. A equals 10, and I can set that to whatever. And I'm asking if A equals 5. You'll notice that we don't use then in Python. We just use a colon, and the colon is used at the beginning of a clause to say everything that follows, excuse me, that's indented, process, right? So if A equals 5, print less than 5. Or if A equals less if A is less than 5, print less than 5. Elif, which is short for else if. A is less than 10, print 5 to 9. Why am I printing 5 to 9 there, not 0 to 9?
Because you already checked if it
Right.
was less than 5.
Right. What happens in an if, elif, else statement is these parts, the lower parts, only process if the earlier part was false. So you got to pay attention to the order that you put things in because it makes a huge difference. So, and then lastly, else. So if is the way that you always start these out. Elif is if you want to add another condition to test for if the first one failed. And then else is if you just want to go ahead and say, without any further condition, print this if the previous conditions weren't met. And the way that you read this is that an if statement, if A is greater than 5, this is where we're going to get to a Boolean. It's going to return a Boolean of true or false. And this is going to say, if you want to read it this way, if A is less than 5 equals true, then do the following. Else, if A is less than 10 is true, then do the following. Does that make sense? No, we don't use curly braces at all in if statements. Oh, did I? Oh. Well, you know, that's you can take the boy out of C, but you can't take C out of the boy, right? Yeah. Okay. So any questions on if, elif, and else? Yeah, this is different because this is what you would use in some of the other languages, JScript, C#, where instead of indenting, you're using these curly braces to let the program know what belongs in each code block. And instead of those curly braces, we indent and we use the colon. So we terminate actually not the statement like we do in other languages. We actually terminate, right up in it, right at the beginning. Okay. And is there anything else that we cover here? And then statements. Think of the difference between a single statement and a compound statement. In a single statement, we only have a single line. We don't need to indent. In a compound statement, it's going to be called a clause, right? So this up here is a clause, just this one piece, right? If A is greater than 5, print. So that's a clause. This first part of the clause, the top part of the clause, is called a header. Everything that comes after the header that's indented after it is called the suite. So the overall thing is called a clause. The statement that starts it off is called the header, and then everything that comes after it is called the suite. And the suite is always indented. It will not run. And what happens if you start off and you have a header, which ends in a colon, and then you don't have a suite? Anyone know? Does it make a difference if you have a... Yep. So if you have a header without a suite, you're going to get an error. How do you avoid that error? I think they are having a separate conversation. Does anyone know how to avoid an error if you have a header and then you don't want to put a suite in?
No.
Okay. So let's do this. A equals 10. If A is less than 5, colon. And the reason I do this is I will a lot of times sort of like put together all of my conditions and then go back and fill in the code to do under those conditions later. If I run this now, I'm going to get this funky error that says expected end of file while parsing. And the reason for that is it's not expecting this thing to end with a colon. So the way I can get around that is I can type in pass. Pass is a keyword that says, hey, I know that I've got a header here. I'm just going to use this pass as a temporary suite, and I'll come back and fill it in later. Make sense? Okay, any questions on statements, statement structure, headers, suites, and how we have to set them up? Okay, so I'm not going to cover the glossary. I think everybody can read the glossary because we're just running short on time. What I want to do is assign chapters 4 through 9. Since we're off next week, I know that's these are like chapters 4, 5, and 6 are some of the longest chapters in the book. Chapters 7, 8, and 9 are very short, right? Since there's no class, it's going to be 2 weeks. And again, I'm really going to encourage you to get in on the practice every day. Post an exercise every week and comment on at least one exercise that somebody else posts, some week, right? Okay, well, do a lot on the week that you're not. Okay?
Okay, by the way, when's the question and answer segment?
We can do that. I mean, we're about 3 minutes over our scheduled time, so I want to make sure that anyone who has other engagements or other commitments can get off of that, and then I will be happy to answer any questions starting now.
I'm not really sure anyone here is engaged because almost all of us aren't old enough.
1, 2.
By the way,
3,
I'm hoping I
4,
didn't offend anyone.
5, 6. 1. I think we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
10 people on
Yeah.
line?
And
yeah, we do.
6 of them are 18 or older, so I'm not worried about. Yeah. So
Tim
I'm not.
Peterson, I believe Ray, yourself,
Yeah.
Distry.
Right. So we have a couple of young folks, and that's okay. Right. And then we have some other folks, and that's what I really like about the makeup of this is that it's a combination of some folks have got a lot of experience in different languages, and some people this is the first thing that they've ever done. Learning to learn any type of programming whatsoever, and everything in between. So hopefully we make a community where everyone can get engaged and do some stuff. Yeah, Matthew, you're what we call a first-year senior, or I'm sorry, first-year freshman.
But I'm not but I'm actually only in 7th grade, and technically this is only my half-ith year,
Tut tut tut
because
tut.
I done like
You're a first year
right before.
freshman. That'll make sense later. You're a first year freshman.
Okay, what happens in years 5 and
Charles?
6?
Do you, hey Charles, do you happen to recommend maybe like a cheat sheet? I have such a hard time remembering which.
That's a great question, and I will either make one and post one, or I'll grab one and post one.
Okay.
Right. So I'll throw that into the, and let me pull this over really quick. So if you're not familiar with our OneNote, and if you don't have, I mean, you should have the link to this. In general documentation, as we've been going along and as I've been reading through the book and doing the example exercises from practicepython.org, I have been keeping track of what I'm running into and sort of like throwing some information in here. So if I've ran into it, it's probably already in this general documentation. If I missed something and it's not there, then make sure by the time that you get done figuring it out, it is there. Okay? And then I will go ahead and put in here a big cheat sheet. I'll either find one or I'll make one.
Even if it's just something that has what just the I don't know what the abbreviations are for some of these things. It's just there's so much to comprehend. Especially I've never really done a lot of coding before, so just trying to figure it out.
So this is the first thing I'm going to say to that is don't stress out over the complexity. What you really want to learn out of the first 10 chapters of this book are really only about maybe 20 concepts. You want to learn the concept of conditional processing, the if, else, elif thing that we talked about. You want to learn looping that we'll talk about the next time we get together. You want to learn about basic string manipulation. You want to learn about data types and how to move stuff back and forth. You want to learn about functions. And then actually, you know what? If you take a look at these chapters, almost all of the main concepts that you're going to want, other than conditional processing and loops, I guess there it is a chapter heading, right? And don't worry about getting into minutia, right? So I'll find a good cheat sheet that isn't too complex, but at the same time has everything you need on it. And then I will put a tab up here called cheat sheet, and it'll be there tonight. Cool?
Cool. By the way, can we have a text channel for like, is this thing only for discussing Python?
No, and in fact, one of the things that you're going to find is that chapter 1 through 11 in this book deals with teaching Python. The rest of the book, so part 11, part 2, part 3, part 4, is more about programming. And the way that I could explain that is this part of the book, section 1 of the book, or part 1 of the book, it's sort of like teaching you all the controls to a car. If you know what a steering wheel is for, if you know what a gas pedal's for, if you know what a gear shift lever's for, if you know what a turn signal's for, if you know what a brake is for, if you know what a clutch is for, you don't know how to drive. You know how to maneuver, or you know how to manipulate the controls of the vehicle. And I want you to think about learning the basics of Python that way. Is just because you know how loops work, just because you know how functions work, doesn't mean that you know how to program. The rest of this course and the majority of the time that we're going to spend is going to be spent talking about programming once you already know the basic controls. And this is where getting in and doing examples where you get to really understand those controls is so important, because once we start getting into such things as building classes, regular expressions, those kind of things later on, you're going to want to have a very solid understanding of those basics. So, and by the way, on the concept of a cheat sheet, I use a cheat sheet at work every single day of my life. I also probably hit the name of it. Stack Overflow, which is a really great site for answering specific problems or specific questions several times a day. And I think, I don't know, Tim, you ever use Stack Overflow? Or do you just memorize everything?
Very rarely.
Okay, say that without the sarcasm.
Well, if I'm really stuck, I use Google.
Yeah.
And somebody somewhere has found an answer.
Right. And there's a rule of thumb I like to go with, and that's that if I haven't found a solution within an hour to any problem, then I'm going to go find out if somebody else has that problem solved for me. The reason I give myself an hour is if I run into something that takes me an hour to figure out, I have some learning to do. And a big part about being a programmer professionally is that constant learning and getting that habit of knowing, the attitude is I don't know it all. I'll never know it all. And because of that, today I want to learn something. So cheat sheets, yeah, they're absolutely great. And in fact, people make cheat sheets and quick start guides and what do they used to call those things? Pocket guides back before the internet was as big as it is now, that had like everything that you'd run into on a regular basis. But now the internet makes it so easy to find stuff. I don't know if those sell very well anymore.
Hey Charles?
Yeah.
Would it be possible to add like a fifth text channel for talking about different languages as well?
Yes.
Kind of annoying to filter through all the random crud and the general thing
Right.
to look for.
Yeah, the general is basically the spam channel. So, there's going to be a lot of junk in that, and that's the reason that the general's there, so that other one's there. Sam is the keeper of the Discord server. So what you're going to want to do is, if you have a request like that, just send it to him, and he'll be happy to work with you. So, hey Sam, could you put a other languages channel? Also, it looks like we've had a change to the logo while we've been talking.
Yeah, I noticed that. Wait, what?
This would be, I believe, the
Okay.
third or fourth change.
Change it to like a computer. Oh, thanks for the other thing, by the way.
Okay, so any other questions?
Who just came on? Or because my thing just dinged. That's my question. What just happened?
I don't know.
I think someone muted.
Yeah. So, if you have no more questions, I think the one thing I'm going to do is encourage everyone who hasn't been using the Discord over the week to use it. It's a great way of reaching out, and what's nice about it is that I think Casey answered most questions before I got to him. Casey and Isaac probably, between the two of them, answered everything before I got to him this week. So, it's a great way of interacting with everybody, and I'm going to really encourage you to use it. Right? Okay. Otherwise, feel free to join on Thursday. If you have anything that comes up, My rule of thumb is I'm going to sit around for 15 minutes. If nobody's there, then I'm going to do something else. If somebody's there, I'll hang out as long as possible. And then if you have any needs that are sort of a one-on-one, I'll be happy to stay on after. Otherwise, have a great week off. Memorial Day. Is it Memorial Day? Memorial Day.
Memorial Day. We will be in Florida.
It's hard to believe it's that late
Hey
in the year.
Charles.
Yes,
so,
sir.
From Iowa City.
Yeah.
Well, but next time
I know.
that we're going to be on this, I will be